Hi, welcome back to Detective and Mystery Fiction. If you enjoy my content, please consider hitting the like button. It's the only way the YouTube algorithm notices me. Blackstar's Subterfuge by Johnston, McCulley. First published in Detective Story magazine, October 5, 1916. Chapter 1. Sudden Illness. Smirks, sarcastic grins, ingratiating smiles. These things had Roger Verbeck endured throughout the afternoon, until it seemed to him that his countenance burned continually because of humiliation, until his face had set with sternness, and he greeted friends and mere acquaintances alike with a cold and distant nod. The Blackstar had done this, that master criminal who had held the city at his mercy for 6 months or more, who committed crimes notable for their originality and daring. It was 5 days now since the Blackstar's robbery of the diamond vault of Jones and Amp Company, a robbery in which he had made Roger Verbeck, his man Muggs, and Detective Riley objects of ridicule. In those 5 days the Blackstar had made no open move, and the 3 men who had sworn to capture him waited for the next blow, hoping that, when it fell, they would at least find some minor clue to follow, some half-hidden trail that would lead them to the quarry. Verbeck had spent the afternoon in the business section purchasing supplies, for he had decided to live in the old Verbeck house with Muggs and Detective Riley, while his campaign against the Blackstar was being waged. Even those who admired him because of his determination to match wits with a master criminal smiled knowingly when he passed. They had read the Blackstar's letters to the newspapers, in which he had told how he had hidden in Verbeck's own house, while the police looked for him throughout the city. And now, at 7 o'clock in the evening, Roger Verbeck sat at a table in a corner of a fashionable restaurant, his back to the room, and tried to enjoy his dinner. Detective Riley had gone to police headquarters for a visit. Muggs was purchasing more supplies, and was to get his own dinner and meet Verbeck with the roadster an hour later. Enjoyment of the meal seemed an impossibility. Verbeck knew those in the restaurant who recognized him were grinning behind his back. He knew the public was watching the duel between himself and the Blackstar, ready to ridicule Verbeck if he lost, and as eager to applaud him if he won and sent the master rogue to prison. The police worked in vain to corral the master crook and his band. Long ago the public had begun to regard the police department as worthless in this particular affair. Moreover, the feud between Roger Verbeck, the young millionaire, and the Blackstar, acknowledged clever criminal, was more spectacular, and so Verbeck found himself in a corner. To save himself from humiliation, he must continue his campaign with the help of only Muggs and Detective Riley, until the Blackstar passed through prison doors to begin a long sentence. The smirks and grins that Verbeck had faced this day served only to double his determination to conquer the Blackstar. It was a game of wits and strategy, for the Blackstar abhorred violence. None knew better than Roger Verbeck that he had been out-generaled in the last affair. But failure had increased his caution and cunning. In their next clash, he felt sure the Blackstar would find that the metal of his foe was better. Now Verbeck sipped his demitasse, and in a panel mirror before him observed the approach of the waiter with a finger bowl. He glanced at his watch. Within 15 minutes Muggs would be before the restaurant with the roadster. They would pick up Riley at headquarters and hurry to the old Verbeck house to begin their vigil. For they slept in the daytime for the greater part and remained alert at night, ready to answer an alarm if the Blackstar committed another crime. Eager to get on the scene as soon as possible and try to pick up the trail. It was known that the Blackstar had reorganized his band and established a new headquarters since Roger Verbeck and Muggs had almost destroyed his establishment. And from this new headquarters, Roger Verbeck doubted not the master crook would conduct a campaign of crime that would terrorize the city. If the new headquarters could be located. "Pardon me, sir," Are you ill?" Even as the waiter spoke, Verbeck realized that his thoughts were becoming confused. His hands were trembling, and beads of perspiration were standing on his forehead. His stomach revolted. He reached for the glass of water near him, and it was necessary for the waiter to guide it to his lips. He stammered. "Try to stand, sir. There is a small retiring room directly to your right. If you wish to go there, sir." The waiter aided him to stand even as he spoke. He guided Verbeck's faltering steps toward the little retiring room. Half a dozen diners had noted the occurrence. The head waiter hurried across the room. "Mr. Verbeck had been taken ill suddenly," the waiter said in a low voice. Almost instantly the manager was among them. "Why, it is Mr. Verbeck," he gasped. "Suddenly ill, you say, George? Get a physician immediately." Verbeck was sitting on the divan in the corner of the room, scarcely able to keep from toppling over. He felt himself growing weaker. His eyes closed, and he was unable to open them again. His head fell back. The manager bent forward and stretched him on the couch. Two men appeared in the doorway, and the manager and head waiter whirled to face them. "Pardon me," the first said, "but I noticed what happened and thought I might be of some service. I am a physician. Here is my card." "Look at this man, then," the manager directed. "He became suddenly ill while eating." The professional-looking man already was bending over Roger Verbeck. His companion stood to one side. "Why, it is Mr. Roger Verbeck," the physician exclaimed. "I know him well, but did not recognize him in the restaurant. His back was toward us." "Anything serious?" asked the worried manager. "He is subject to these attacks. A peculiar stomach trouble," the physician explained. "I have treated him many times. Undoubtedly, he ate something a bit too rich. No, it is not serious, but we must get him home. Have one of your men call a taxicab and let it go into the alley. We can get him through the hallway and kitchen and into the cab. I presume you do not wish to have the other diners disturbed." The manager of the restaurant did not. That was what was worrying him. He sent a waiter to call the cab. He watched while the physician mixed a drop of medicine in water and poured the mixture down Verbeck's throat. The manager did not think it peculiar, in that moment of excitement, that the physician carried a vial of medicine in his waistcoat pocket. "We'll take care of him, sir," the doctor went on. "This is a friend of mine who was dining with me. Do not be alarmed. I assure you, Mr. Verbeck will be himself again within an hour. It really is an advertisement for your place. Rather than otherwise, it shows your food is rich." The physician chuckled and smiled, quite like a professional man taking charge of a situation and trying to put everyone at ease. The manager felt grateful. He walked ahead as the physician and his friend carried Roger Verbeck through the narrow rear hallway and through the kitchen to the back door. He watched as they put him in the cab. "Drive to Mr. Verbeck's residence as quickly as possible," he heard the physician order the chauffeur. "You know where it is? The old Verbeck mansion?" "Good." Well satisfied, the manager went back to the dining room, glad that it had not been any fault of his food that had made Roger Verbeck ill. Glad also that few of the regular diners had noticed the incident. The cab started through the alley, turned into the first street, and hurried toward a boulevard close by. "Easy," the physician said to his companion, chuckling as he looked at the unconscious Verbeck. The cab sped along the boulevard. The Verbeck mansion was to the north. The taxi dashed south. Chapter 2. Unexpected Sleep. Muggs would not have recognized a pterodactyl had he met one face-to-face in the street. Also, he was woefully deficient in theories regarding the fourth dimension. He had, however, taken a postgraduate course in the University of Hard Knocks, where he had specialized in human nature, and hence he knew many things his better-educated brethren did not. Muggs knew, for instance, that there are smiles and smiles, that they may be read as easily as print, and that, if read correctly, they tell a man's intentions, or a woman's, as openly as spoken words. So now, when the stranger smiled at him again, Muggs analyzed the smile quickly and efficiently, and noted the one important thing, that the stranger smiled with his lips, but not with his eyes. The eyes were small and grey, and appeared to glitter venomously. Either the glitter of those eyes or the smile on the lips expressed a falsehood, and Muggs decided it was the smile that lied. Muggs was aware, also, that the stranger had been regarding him intently for 10 minutes at least. He had felt the other's eyes upon him. There had been a time in Muggs' career when he had been sensitive enough to feel immediately the near presence of a hostile force, an accomplishment that often had saved him from prison. Though now he walked the straight and narrow path as valet, chauffeur, and comrade-in-arms to Roger Verbeck, he retained a great deal of his old sensitiveness. Verbeck had told him to eat before rejoining him, and so Muggs had entered this little restaurant on a side street and ordered a modest meal. He had no more than seated himself when he became aware that he was under surveillance. Being a man of broad experience, and at present engaged with Verbeck and Detective Riley in matching wits with the clever crook and his followers, Muggs used caution. He did not turn his head quickly to ascertain the identity of the person whose eyes he felt. He sipped his coffee and conveyed a generous bite of pie to his mouth, sat back and wiped his lips, and without seeming to look up, he searched with his eyes a panel mirror directly before him, in which was reflected the interior of the little restaurant. It was almost the same minute that Roger Verbeck, in the more fashionable restaurant, looked in a mirror and observed the approach of his waiter with the finger bowl. Muggs spotted his man. He of the glittering eyes sat at a table near the door and pretended to be eating berries and cake. He was regarding the back of Muggs' head intently and smiling the lying smile. "There's one hombre I've never seen before, to the best of my knowledge and belief," Muggs told himself, "yet he seems to be mighty interested in me. A man would think he was laying to hand me a jolt, the way he acts. It's up to me to hand out the jolt first." Muggs picked up his check and reached for his hat. As he turned to walk the length of the restaurant, he saw that the other man had risen also, and was hurrying toward the cashier's cage. Realizing that the stranger was eager to get outside, either to accost or trail him, Muggs did some smiling of his own now, and a wise man could have read many things in that smile. The most important being to hurry from the vicinity of Mr. Muggs as speedily as possible. Muggs paid his check and fumbled over the toothpicks, giving the other man ample time to establish himself outside to his satisfaction. Then he threw back his shoulders, shot out his lower jaw belligerently, and headed for the door. The stranger with the glittering eyes was standing at the curb, a short distance away, just at the rear of a taxicab, and looking up and down the street as if awaiting an automobile. Muggs walked straight toward him. "Pardon me, but are you an artist?" Muggs demanded, in a peculiar tone. "I am not." "Why do you ask, sir?" They faced each other squarely. The stranger was well aware now that Muggs knew of the recent espionage, and was about to demand an explanation, and Muggs knew he was aware of it. "You ain't looking for a model of a perfect male human head?" Muggs asked now. "I am not, sir." "I thought maybe you was, stranger. The way you bored them eyes of yours into my head back there in the restaurant, I not only suspicioned you was looking for a model, but that you'd found your man." I beg your pardon," the other simulated astonishment. "Yea? Do I infer from that, stranger, that you ain't found your man? If for any particular reason you was looking for me, I'm here with my pedigree. My name's Muggs. I've got one peculiarity, and that is that when I find a stranger regarding me too close, I always want to plant a fist tween his eyes. Ain't that funny? Really, And just now," Muggs went on, "I'm engaged in a simple endeavor on the side, as my boss would say, that makes me nervous when a man gets pesty around me. I'm that nervous right now I could choke a man." I fail to see," the other stammered, and he started to walk slowly along the curb, Muggs following. "It ain't polite to stare at the back of a man's head and grin sickly-like at the same time," Muggs continued. "There wasn't anybody near me in there, and so you was looking at me." "I want to know why. Now suppose you give me your pedigree so we'll know just where we stand." They were opposite the taxicab now, and the chauffeur sprang from his seat and opened the door as if in anticipation of a fare. It appeared to Muggs that the other man would be only too glad to jump into that taxi and hurry away without explaining, and Muggs did not wish that. While the war against the Blackstar and his band was in progress, explanations of any peculiar circumstance were necessary. So now Muggs stepped before the open door of the cab himself, blocking the way, and faced the man who had smiled. "I'm waitin' for an answer," Muggs declared. The stranger bent forward in the gathering dusk and raised a forefinger, as if to begin a protest of this conduct on Muggs' part. The chauffeur stood with his hand on the door, waiting. "It seems to me," the stranger began, and in that second, Muggs realized that he had walked right into a trap. The chauffeur grasped him by the throat and kicked his feet from beneath him. The stranger he faced lunged forward suddenly and threw Muggs off his balance. Muggs was hurled to the interior of the cab neatly, and only one person on the street had witnessed the occurrence. Like a flash, Muggs had his feet under him again and was crouched against the seat, ready to spring through the door and throttle the first of his foes he met. It flashed through his mind that he should blame himself much for being caught off guard. And then, before he scarcely realized what was happening, before he could make a move, the man who had watched him in the restaurant had entered the cab and closed the door. And the vehicle was moving away from the curb. "Easy, easy, my man," the stranger warned. The cab passed beneath the arc light at the corner just then, and Muggs saw steel glitter in the other's hand. It was not the nature of Muggs, however, to allow himself to be captured in this manner without making some effort to disconcert his captors. Moreover, he guessed this man and the chauffeur might belong to the Blackstar's band. This might be part of a pre-arranged plan to injure Roger Verbeck in some way. And all that was necessary to arouse Muggs's ire and fighting blood was to threaten disaster to Verbeck, the man he adored, who had saved him from the waters of the Seine 5 years before and made him a man. It took Muggs less than half a second to get his breath and decide that the proper thing to do would be to spring upon the other man and make an effort to overcome him, taking the chance of receiving a bullet in his vitals. Muggs sprang like a lion, and silently, in mid-air, he met something new. The other had raised what Muggs had supposed was an automatic pistol fitted with a silencer. Now he pulled the trigger. No hot lead seared Muggs, no bullet tore its way through his body. But from the muzzle of the weapon flashed a cloud of pungent vapor, and Muggs, gasping his surprise, drew the vapor deep into his lungs. The stranger caught Muggs in his arms and lowered him gently to the floor of the taxi. It seemed to Muggs that he realized fully what was going on, but was unable to do anything about it. He noticed the other man take a handkerchief from his pocket and hold it to his nostrils, and above the handkerchief the eyes glittered venomously as before. Muggs saw all this as they passed under another arc light, and then dreamless sleep descended upon him. Chapter 3. The New Headquarters. Muggs regained his cunning the instant he regained consciousness. He realized he was stretched on a couch, and that his hands and feet were bound. He made no effort to struggle, and he did not even open his eyes. For fully a minute he lay motionless, almost without breathing, his ears strained to catch every sound. Once, coming from a distance, he heard the clanging bell of a trolley car, the rattling of vehicles on a busy paved street, the moaning of the wind that had been blowing a gale at the time of his abduction, the low-pitched voices of men in the room, discussing his case, The things he expected to hear were not discernible. Still, he did not open his eyes, hoping that, if anybody was in the room, they would speak sooner or later and give him some clue to his predicament. He was breathing deeply and regularly now. His brain had cleared, and he knew the effect of the vapor he had inhaled had worn away. And then, why play possum, Mr. Muggs? You have been conscious, and your brain has been active for the better part of 5 minutes, and I know it. The voice was low, deep, striking, the words coming in a peculiar staccato. Muggs remembered that the Blackstar possessed a voice like that. He opened his eyes. That is better. Why pretend? Opening his eyes was all Muggs did, save gasp, for he did not have to move his body to observe the scene. It was spread before him. He was on a couch in a corner of a large room. The apartment was lavishingly furnished. Mahogany table and chairs, tapestries, art rugs were there to delight the eye. At one end of the table stood a tall figure, enveloped in a flowing black robe with a hood that covered the head. The face was hidden by a black mask through which 2 eyes glittered. On the front of the hood, in flaming jet, was a big star. The Black Star. Muggs gasped, scarcely knowing why he spoke at all, since it seemed so useless. You have guessed correctly, Muggs, the Black Star said, chuckling. Once again you see the Black Star in his headquarters, his workshop. Before, you visited me like a thief in the night, accompanied by Roger Verbeck, the man you style your boss. This time, I have had you brought here. The Black Star folded his arms and looked at the man on the couch, as if speculating what to do with him. Muggs remained silent, waiting, his brain busy with 1,000 thoughts. He knew now that it was a member of the Black Star's band who had watched him in the restaurant, and that the chauffeur had been another. And why had he been abducted and carried to the master criminal's headquarters? Did the Black Star think he could hold Muggs as hostage and force Roger Verbeck to cease his campaign to put the master rogue behind the bars? Really, Mr. Muggs, I had hoped for something better from you, the Black Star was saying. When I gave orders for you to be abducted and carried here, I laughed to myself. I believed the men who received those orders would have their hands full. It appears, however, that the task was as easy as picking up a child. Yea? Muggs snarled. I knew, you see, that you would be in the business district today, since Roger Verbeck was purchasing supplies, stocking up the old Verbeck house well, to be comfortable with you and Detective Riley while conducting his campaign to capture me. And you can bet he'll get you yet, Muggs loyally exclaimed. Do you really think so, Muggs? However, I have you now. Well, what's it to be? Going to shoot me or what? My dear Muggs, I abhor violence. I am not a thug. Wit, strategy, the game of brains, those are the things. My purpose in bringing you here was not ulterior. Talk United States and get it off your chest quick, Muggs said. Such language! I cannot, for the life of me, understand why a refined gentleman like Roger Verbeck endures your companionship. By having you carried here, I believed I was doing Mr. Verbeck a favor. Yea? He matched his wit against mine, and almost destroyed my organization once. I escaped the silly police, however, and formed my organization anew, also obtained a new headquarters. Has it not been the desire of yourself, Mr. Verbeck and Detective Riley, the trio sworn to capture me, to discover the whereabouts of this new headquarters? Well, here it is, Muggs. I can see the headquarters all right, and please observe the heavy curtain on that side of the room. It covers an open doorway, Muggs. I am going to lift that curtain now and give you a shock. Yes, Muggs. I feel sure it will be quite a shock. The Black Star walked slowly across the room to the curtain, turned and looked at Muggs again, then swiftly threw the curtain back. With an exclamation, Muggs struggled to get to his feet. In the doorway, sitting bound in a chair, his hands fastened before him, was Roger Verbeck. A handkerchief gagged him, You got the boss," Muggs cried. Oh yes. It proved as easy to capture Roger Verbeck as it did to get you, Muggs. So do not feel too much grieved that you were taken by my men. I merely wanted to make sure of the capture of one of you, to show you the new headquarters. But my men were so successful they caught two of you. Match wits with the Blackstar and his band? You poor fools. You. Muggs sputtered in sudden wrath at seeing his beloved master in such an extremity. Rage gathered within him, and he twisted at wrists and ankles in a futile effort to get free. The Blackstar stepped forward and pushed against Muggs' breast, and Muggs was toppled over on the couch. "Take it easy, Muggs," the Blackstar advised. "I have no intention of harming Mr. Verbeck nor yourself. I merely intend keeping both of you here for a short time, letting you witness anything that may transpire, and then you'll be allowed to go. Understand?" Muggs growled and looked at the floor. Verbeck felt suddenly elated. It would be like the Blackstar to take such a chance. He could crow about it afterward, write letters to the papers, and say he had abducted Roger Verbeck and Muggs and revealed the new headquarters to them, yet could not be located and captured. And it was possible, Verbeck thought, that he might observe or hear something that would give him a clue to the location of the place. He doubted not that when he and Muggs were sent away again, they would go unconscious, as they had come. "This headquarters is a great improvement over the old one," the Blackstar said. "I really ought to thank you, Mr. Verbeck, for driving me out of the other." "Allow me, Mr. Verbeck, to remove the gag." He went forward and removed it, and unlashed Verbeck from the chair. Then he helped him hop across the room and caused him to sit down beside Muggs. "That is much better," he said. "I may mention that it will do you no good to shriek or screech or howl for assistance. The place we are, Einar." A bell had tinkled. Muggs struggled and managed to sit up on the couch beside Verbeck. Both of them remembered about that other headquarters. Their bells had tinkled, and members of the Blackstar's band of criminals had entered to make reports or receive orders. Gowns and masks, and conversations carried out on blackboards. Yes, there were the blackboards. "A friend is coming, gentlemen," the Blackstar said. "I request that you remain on the couch and keep silent. You cannot tell what may happen if you try to leave the couch." The Blackstar chuckled and disappeared through a small door. Again, a bell tinkled. Another door on the opposite side of the room opened, and there entered another man clad in black robe and mask, save that no star of jet flamed on the hood of the robe. He started forward in surprise when he observed Muggs seated upon the couch beside Verbeck, but checked himself and did not speak. Neither did Verbeck speak, for he was busy speculating as to the newcomer's height and weight, watching every movement he made, trying to fasten upon something that would enable him to recognize the man if they met again elsewhere. Muggs, however, refused to remain silent. "Good evening," he said. "The boss is out just now. Anything I can do for you? Got a few diamonds or anything like that you've pinched today?" The smaller door opened, and the Blackstar entered the room. He went immediately to one of the little blackboards on the wall, picked up a piece of chalk and wrote quickly, "Muggs, silence, as I instructed," or then he turned and exhibited to Muggs a weapon. Verbeck supposed it to be an ordinary revolver, but Muggs, who had passed through an experience that evening, guessed that it held no bullets, but the pungent vapor that had caused his downfall in the taxicab. Muggs became silent. He did not wish to be put to sleep, while Roger Verbeck was there, and might soon need help. The Blackstar motioned his man to the second blackboard. "No, 7, the man wrote. "Countersign?" the Blackstar demanded on his board. "Georgia." "Report." The other turned his back and wrote rapidly, and at length. Muggs and Verbeck bent forward on the couch and peered across the room. Was it possible, Verbeck wondered, that the Blackstar was going to allow them to read the blackboard conversation and then let them go back to the Verbeck house with whatever information they had acquired? The message was done. The man stepped back. Verbeck and Muggs read what he had written as the Blackstar read it. Our man goes on duty tonight. Burglar alarms have been fixed. At 2 in the morning, policeman on beat always stops in restaurant for coffee, as was reported before. Should he not, disturbance will be raised at end of block to decoy him away at proper time. The Blackstar motioned for him to erase, then wrote himself, "What about the gold?" Gold received today at noon, moved in quickly and secretly. 100,000 in usual sacks. Intend keeping it here about week, then shipping it on, part at time. When Verbeck read that he had difficulty in adhering to his determination to betray no astonishment. Was it possible the master criminal and his band contemplated the theft of $100,000 in gold coin? And they were discussing it, here before him and Muggs, as if they had been discussing the state of the weather. Arrangements for moving perfected? The Blackstar wrote now. Everything in Riadinex cannot fail, the other answered with the chalk. 2 closed autos. 6 of us to handle coin. Garbage wagon will block one end of alley. We will guard other end. Verbeck was getting the details swiftly now, and an exchange of glances with Muggs showed that the latter also was letting every word written on the blackboard beat into his brain, and making a special effort to remember. They were going to move a fortune in gold in 2 closed autos. One end of the alley would be blocked, and the other guarded. Of all the nerve... Good, the Blackstar was writing now. Let it be tonight at the time agreed. Why, Verbeck even knew the time. 2 o'clock in the morning, when the policeman on the beat would either be drinking coffee in a restaurant, else attracted by a fake fight. All Verbeck had to do now, if allowed to go, or if he escaped in time, was to get word to Detective Riley and to police headquarters. Have the chief ascertain what bank or trust company had 100,000 in gold received that day, place police around the building, frustrate the Blackstar's plan, and possibly capture the master crook or some of his band. Moreover, there was a chance. But the Blackstar was writing again. Observe men on couch. One nearest you is Verbeck, other his man, Muggs. Keep your eyes peeled for them in public. Okay, the other wrote. The Blackstar nodded and waved his hand in a gesture of dismissal. The other bowed and backed through the door. A minute of silence. Then the tinkling of the bell. Ah, he has gone, the Blackstar spoke. You see, Mr. Verbeck, I have the same arrangement as before. I never see the faces of these men of mine, and they never get a glance at me. We do not hear each other's voices. I gather information, plan the work, divide profits. They are faithful men who work together at my bidding. But they could not testify against me, nor I against them, in case of capture. You see? Yea? Muggs cried. How about the 8 we caught before? They saw your face all right. My dear Muggs, they were bailed out, were they not? And they have left the country, supplied with ample funds, you may be sure. The men working with me now are those who were not caught and did not see my face, and some new ones my partner procured. You mean to stand there and tell us, Verbeck said, that you are going to steal 100,000 in gold coin tonight? At precisely 2 o'clock in the morning, Mr. Verbeck. You can't get away with it, Muggs exclaimed. No? Did I not get away with a choice collection of diamonds from the vault of Jones and Company, while you and Verbeck and Detective Riley looked on? Yea? Well, you'll go too far one of these days. We'll get you, and we'll get you good. And when we do, good night, you'll get more than life. Meaning death, Muggs? When the time comes, my man, I'll know how to die, even if I have to descend to suicide. The Blackstar turned and paced the length of the room. Verbeck leaned back against the cushions on the couch and wondered what the Blackstar intended doing next. He was willing to let Muggs do the talking while he strained his ears for some sound and his eyes for some sight that would reveal to him the location of the building in which they found themselves. He knew the Blackstar never would let him and Muggs leave the place while conscious. Not having knowledge of the vapor gun, Verbeck found himself wondering just how his unconsciousness was to be brought about. Regarding his own capture, he guessed simply that one of the Blackstar's gang was employed in the restaurant. Undoubtedly some opiate had been in his coffee. It might have been placed there by a kitchen employee, or by the waiter. He imagined the rest, that members of the Blackstar's band had pretended to help him home and had taken him to the Master Crook's headquarters instead. "Well," Muggs exclaimed, "I suppose you're going to keep us tied up here like a couple of bundles of rags until you pull off this stunt tonight, eh? That'll be nice. My dear Muggs, I merely wanted you and Mr. Verbeck to see my new headquarters. Presently, I am going to have you taken from here and dropped on some corner near the Verbeck house. I am, really. I got a picture of you doing that, after us seeing all this. Only, of course, my dear Muggs, I could not allow you to get a full view of your surroundings. You gentlemen have seen the inside of this room, and that is all. And this room might be in the basement of a factory or the top floor of a hotel, for all you know. And when you leave, it must be as you arrived, unconscious. Understand?" Neither Verbeck nor Muggs replied to that. It was what Verbeck had expected. They would see the interior of this room, but not the exterior of the building. They would regain consciousness again near home. And how could they find the spot again? Why, this room might be in any one of 10,000 buildings in the city. The bell tinkled again. A short wait, and a gowned and masked man entered. "No, 10, he wrote on the blackboard. "Countersign?" "Jackson." "Good. You are on time," the Blackstar wrote. "You will take these men and drop them within a block or two of the Verbeck place. They must leave this room as they entered it. Unconscious." "Okay," the other wrote. He turned from the blackboard. The Blackstar, his eyes glittering malevolently through his mask, took a step forward. Muggs struggled to his feet before Verbeck could make a move. "You squirt that stuff at me again," he threatened. The Blackstar chuckled as if greatly amused. The other man's hand came into view, and it held the vapor gun. He stepped swiftly toward the crouching, defiant Muggs as Verbeck struggled to stand. "You dare squirt that." Muggs started to threaten again. Slowly, the weapon in the hand of the gowned and masked man was raised, up and up, until the muzzle covered Muggs' heart. Then, suddenly, the man who menaced Muggs whirled and faced the Blackstar, and the weapon he held was turned against the Master Crook. "Hands up, you," he cried, and tore the mask from his face. Verbeck and Muggs gave cries of relief and joy. Here was no member of the Blackstar's organization. Detective Riley stood before them. Chapter 4. What Riley did. His visit to police headquarters that afternoon had proved highly unpleasant for Detective Riley. It was his first appearance there, since the chief had assigned him to live with Roger Verbeck and aid him in getting a clue to the Blackstar's whereabouts. Since he had joined forces with Verbeck, Riley had come in for sarcastic sentences in the Blackstar's letters to the newspapers, and his comrades at headquarters were not slow to torment him when he appeared that afternoon. Riley had intended remaining at headquarters until Verbeck picked him up in the roadster about 8 o'clock. His tormentors drove him away at 5. He walked slowly up the avenue, got something to eat at his favorite chop house, and then continued his promenade. He knew where Verbeck would dine, and intended to be in front of the cafe waiting beside the roadster with Muggs when Verbeck emerged. Acquaintances stopped him frequently to discuss the Blackstar and his latest exploit. It was almost 7 o'clock when Riley swung into a side street to hurry toward the cafe, and at the curb in the distance he saw Verbeck's big roadster. Muggs, then, must be in the near vicinity, he knew. He quickened his stride. And then he saw Muggs, saw him standing before the open door of a taxicab, evidently in argument with a tall individual who bent forward and shook a forefinger under Muggs' nose. And then, Detective Riley scarcely could believe his eyes. Experience had taught him, however, to act first and analyze things afterward. Just as he saw Muggs hurled backward into the taxicab, Riley sprinted forward. He was still some 50 feet away when the chauffeur of the cab sent his machine dashing down the street. Detective Riley did not shout a command to stop, nor draw a weapon and fire into the air. He was too wise for that. It was evident to him that Muggs was being abducted. The fact that there was no commotion in the cab, that a door was not thrown open, and either Muggs or his abductor hurled to the pavement, convinced Riley that Muggs had met with foul play the instant his abductor had followed him into the cab. Who would annoy Muggs, assault him, abduct him? Nobody, Riley decided, except persons allied with the Blackstar. Where were they taking Muggs? That, Riley determined to discover. There was Verbeck's Roadster at the curb, one of the most powerful cars in the city, and Detective Riley had operated it before. Now he ran forward and sprang into the seat, and an instant later was making his way down the boulevard, one eye on the street before him and the other on the taxicab in the distance. A traffic officer, recognizing him and noting the look on the detective's face, hurried him across a busy cross street, and Riley sped on. He had gained considerably on the taxicab ahead. He did not try to gain more, but kept his distance. Riley was aware that members of the Blackstar's band were familiar with the appearance of Verbeck's Roadster and did not care to follow the taxicab close enough to make its chauffeur suspicious. The sixth sense that all good police officers possess told Riley to trail that other car, to discover where Muggs was being taken, and why. After a time, the taxi left the broad boulevard, went into a side street, and turned toward the manufacturing district. Here there was less traffic, and Riley dropped behind, knowing he could speed up and overhaul the other car if it turned aside. Over rough streets, paved with cobblestones, through muddy alleys, the cab led the way. Riley was using great caution now, never sounding his horn, dropping behind as long as he could see the tail light on the car, speeding up whenever it made a turning. Now they were down near the river, where the street lights were placed far apart, a district teeming with life and industry in the daytime, but almost deserted after nightfall. Here were the city's smaller manufacturing plants, were old factories and abandoned buildings scattered among the ones where machinery hummed during the day. The taxi made another turning, and again Riley raced the Roadster forward to the corner, the powerful engine making scarcely a sound. As he approached the corner, he slowed down. When he reached it, he saw that the taxicab had stopped at the curb half a block away. Riley drove the Roadster across the street, sprang out, and hurried back to the corner. There was scarcely any light on this block, yet enough for him to make out that two men were carrying a third between them from the taxi and through a gate in a factory fence. The semi-darkness was kind to Riley. He slipped from shadow to shadow, came to the fence, and hurried along it, careful to make no noise. At the gate, he stopped to peer around the post. The two men were carrying Muggs through a little door in the side of an abandoned factory building. Riley waited until they had disappeared, then hurried across the enclosure, reaching the corner of the building just in time to escape being seen by the chauffeur as he emerged. The chauffeur hurried out to the car, and Riley let him go. To attack the man might mean that he would fail to subdue him, that an alarm would be given, and all chance to investigate this affair further be lost. Riley slipped in through the door and found himself in a narrow, dark hallway. He heard no sound. He followed the hall for some distance, until he came to a flight of steps. Down these he hurried, and into another hall. He came to a door beneath which light showed. To the right of the door was another flight of steps that led upward, and there was an open door at the top. Riley listened for some time, and heard no conversation. He hurried up the steps and through the door, to find himself in a dusty room half filled with rusty machinery. Light came through the floor. Riley knelt on the dusty boards and peered through a tiny crack. He gasped at what he saw. Muggs was stretched on a couch in a corner. Before a blackboard stood the Blackstar. Before another blackboard was the gowned and masked figure of Muggs' abductor. The Blackstar was writing, "Understand? Return in hour and half with taxi to take this man and the other away again. They must be put to sleep first, of course." The other man nodded and backed through a door. Detective Riley made no effort to descend the steps and catch him in the lower hall. Before his eyes was the Blackstar, the big quarry, and the other man was to return in an hour and a half. Neither did Riley hurry below and make an effort to capture the master criminal in his lair. He determined to watch developments. He did not know what a few minutes might bring forth. Important clues that would lead to the capture of members of the Blackstar's band might be forthcoming, and it appeared that there was no danger at present of Muggs being made the victim of violence, since the abductor was to return and remove him. Also, the Blackstar had spoken of another man. With his eyes glued to the crack in the floor, Riley waited breathlessly, an interested spectator of what transpired. The Blackstar spent some minutes walking back and forth across the room, now and then chuckling as he looked at the unconscious Muggs. Then he spoke, and Muggs showed that he had regained consciousness. From then until the Blackstar raised the curtain and showed Roger Verbeck gagged and lashed to a chair. Detective Riley lost not a word or movement of the master crook, but the sight of Verbeck, held a helpless prisoner, almost made Riley lose caution. He was on his feet instantly, ready to slip down the stairs, cover the Blackstar with a weapon, release Verbeck and Muggs, and take the master rogue prisoner. But caution returned to him in time to check such a course. To make a move like that might be to meet with disaster. Riley did not know whether other members of the band were near, ready to answer an alarm from the Blackstar. He did not know what would confront him if he threw open the door and faced the Blackstar, for the Blackstar had proved he had unusual methods of protection. And a slip, a mistake, a failure, might result in the capture of the master criminal being further delayed. Riley decided to watch longer, that there was no need for immediate action, since Verbeck and Muggs did not appear to be in peril. He stooped over the crack again, and there he remained. He heard the bell ring and saw a gowned and masked figure enter and give number and countersign. And then Detective Riley forgot even Roger Verbeck and his predicament momentarily, as he read the blackboard conversation and realized what the Blackstar and his band intended doing that night. Riley had an added need for caution now. He had to rescue Verbeck and Muggs, prevent the theft of the gold, capture the Blackstar, and some of his band, if possible. He could slip away and go for help, but while he was gone, Verbeck and Muggs might be moved, and Riley would not know where they had been taken, or the master criminal might leave his headquarters, and the police find an empty nest when they arrived. Also, Detective Riley, who had known Verbeck's father and adored the son, decided he would rather win the victory with only Verbeck and Muggs to help. He wanted to see Verbeck victorious in his feud with the master criminal, and the Blackstar was a man of strategy who would not be captured through violence. 2 or 3 men meeting him at his own game would have a better chance for victory. There was another angle too. A noisy attack on the Blackstar's headquarters would warn the members of his band and allow them to escape. By working a clever plan of campaign, it was possible to arrest some of the master crook's accomplices. Riley had the plan. He remembered how Roger Verbeck, on a former occasion, had donned the Blackstar's robe and mask and played master rogue for a day. Riley decided now that the best plan would be to get into that lower room and make the Blackstar prisoner. Then Roger Verbeck could play rogue again, and as the members reported for orders, they could be captured, one at a time. Riley knew he courted disaster if he stepped into that room and faced the Blackstar in the guise of a police officer. He did not doubt that the Blackstar, even facing a loaded pistol, might use some trick and turn the scales in his favor. Had he not, once before, touched a button with his toe and sent Roger Verbeck to the bottom of a pit 12 feet deep? If I could get into a gown and mask, and get right beside him without him suspecting me, Riley mused. Gown and mask, he doubted not, were to be found someplace in the lower hall. But, once inside the room, Riley would have to give number and countersign to throw the Blackstar off his guard for an instant. The instant necessary to do the work properly. That was what bothered Riley, the number and countersign. Then he remembered the man who was to return and take Verbeck and Muggs away. Riley got up from the floor, crept down the stairs, and hid among the shadows in the lower hall near the outside door. He did not have to wait long. A shadowy form slipped through the gate and took up a position a few paces outside the door. Crouching just inside, Riley waited. The other was waiting too, looking at his watch now and then, and grumbling. And then, down the street, came a taxicab. It stopped at the curb. The chauffeur glanced up and down the street, and then darted through the gate and hurried toward the door. The other man stepped forward to meet him. "You're 5 minutes late," he said. "Want me to catch particular fits from the big boss?" "Got here as soon as I could." "I'm no." 20. Countersign Trenton. "I'm no." 10. Countersign Jackson. "Good. What's the game?" "We've got this Roger Verbeck and his valet inside. I'm to put him to sleep, and we're to take him near Verbeck's house and drop him there. Stand near the door and be ready to help. I'll get into the robe and mask and have him out here in a jiffy." The chauffeur turned his back and glanced at his cab. The other man whirled around and started for the door. Riley had the information he desired now. He knew this man's number and countersign, and how to use them. The man who had entered the hallway went to a small box against the wall and took from it robe and mask. As he raised the robe to don it, Detective Riley struck swiftly and with precision, a sharp blow from a blackjack in the approved place, just behind the left ear. The Blackstar's man went down without a groan. Riley gagged him with a handkerchief and bound his hands and feet with some old straps he had carried for that purpose from the room above. Working swiftly, he put on gown and mask, rolled the unconscious man to one side, and fumbled around the box until he found a push button. He pressed the button. A bell tinkled in the distance. Almost immediately there was an answering tinkle, and Riley hurried through the hallway and opened the door of the illuminated room. His glance rested first on the glittering eyes of the Blackstar, then upon Verbeck and Muggs. Whether the Blackstar was aware of the deception or not, Riley did not know, but he was forced to turn his back and write his number on the blackboard. The countersign followed, and the Blackstar's orders, and then Riley advanced upon the defiant Muggs, waited until he was in the proper position, and whirled to level his weapon at the Blackstar, and to tear off his mask. He heard the gasps of relief and joy from Verbeck and Muggs, but did not glance toward them again. Riley's eyes were blazing into those of the master criminal, and he was watching for the Blackstar to make a move. Chapter 5. Blackstar takes a trick. Silence for a moment, and then Riley spoke in a tense voice, and swiftly, "Careful! Move hand or foot, and I'll fire. I'm not taking any chances with you, Mr. Blackstar." A chuckle came from behind the mask, and the peculiar staccato voice of the master criminal answered him. "Detective Riley, as I live. Very clever of you. Very, and threatening, of course. Violence. Always violence instead of wit and strategy." "Keep those hands up," Riley commanded. "Don't move an inch. I'd as soon shoot you as not, but I guess we'll take you down to the station instead. And you'll not escape this time either. Do you really think you have me?" the Blackstar asked. "You expect to take me from my own headquarters to a filthy jail? Never mind the talk. Muggs, can you hobble over here beside me, so I can untie your hands and watch this chap at the same time? Then you can release Verbeck. and we'll play the rest of the evening's game in our own fashion." The Blackstar laughed aloud as Muggs stood up and started to hop like a toad to the detective's side. Riley's glance did not waver. He held the automatic steady, and his eyes never left the Blackstar's mask. Muggs stopped beside him. Riley put down his left hand and fumbled until he found Muggs' wrists, and then, still watching the master crook, he began working at the knots. "You are a very courageous man, Mr. Riley," the Blackstar said. "You cannot guess what may happen in a situation like this. Perhaps the floor will fall from under you, as it did with Mr. Verbeck once, and let you down into a pit. You may turn to find half a dozen of my good friends at your back, ready to seize you. Don't worry about me turning. I'm keeping my eyes on you," Riley snarled. "Try something new." "Something new? Something clever?" the Blackstar said, his tone sarcastic. "Let me think. I might extinguish the light so we could fight it out in the dark, but still, that is not new. You'll notice the room is illuminated by only one lamp, which stands on the table beside me." "I'm not looking at lamps. I'm watching you," Riley replied. The knots were proving difficult to untie with one hand, but Riley kept working at them without looking down. If he could get Muggs' hands free, Muggs could untie his feet and release Verbeck. They could bind and gag the Blackstar. Verbeck could don his robe and mask, and they could capture, one by one, such of the band as came to report or receive orders. "Those are excellent knots," the Blackstar observed. "At some future time, I'll be glad to teach you how to tie them. Don't you think this comedy has gone quite far enough?" "If this is your idea of a comedy, you'll be liable to change your mind before long," Riley said. "I am interested to know how you got inside, and how you knew what number and countersign to write. Some of my men must have been careless." "You'll find one of them in the hall with a broken head," Riley exclaimed. "Indeed. Always violent. If you would learn to use wit and strategy instead of the broken sentence, a quick move, a shot, darkness." The Blackstar had taken the chance. On the word, he had sprung to one side, toward the table. Riley's bullet went within 6 inches of his head. There was a crash as the lamp was dashed to the floor. Twice more flame streaked the darkness, and bullets crashed into the wall. Verbeck, helpless, struggled to get to his feet. Muggs mouthed imprecations because his hands were still bound. Black silence then. Not even a man's breathing to be heard. Riley had retreated silently to the door, and stood there straining his ears to catch some slight sound that would tell him where the master criminal was crouching. He did not dare fire at random again. He did not know but what Muggs had moved, and might receive the bullet intended for the Blackstar. He was afraid Verbeck had left the couch. A slight hissing sound, a body crashing to the floor. Riley, holding his breath, wondered what it meant. Was it Verbeck? Muggs? Had the Blackstar descended to the violence he scoffed and used a knife in the dark? Verbeck, on the couch, wondered too. His nerves were on edge, waiting for the shot he expected with every heartbeat. He heard the hissing again, the sound of another falling body, then a moment of silence again. The strain was almost unbearable. Verbeck felt like shrieking, like calling to Riley and Muggs, though he knew neither would answer and betray his position. A chuckle, a deep, satisfied laugh. On the opposite side of the room, a match flickered, and in its flame Verbeck beheld the black mask, the flaming jet star on the hood above it. "Quite melodramatic, Mr. Verbeck, eh?" the Blackstar said. "I was forced to take quite a chance that time. Detective Riley might have sent a bullet or two into my body. However, luck was with me again." The match flame died out. The Blackstar struck another and carried it across the room. He picked up the lamp, put it back on the table. "Only the chimney broken," he said. "We'll have poor light, but it will serve." He chuckled again as he touched the flaming match to the wick. The fitful, uncertain light filled the room. Verbeck gave a cry of horror. Muggs was stretched on the floor near the table. Riley lay on his face near the door. "Do not be alarmed for your friends," the master criminal said. "They have not been assassinated, Mr. Verbeck, but merely put to sleep for a short time. Unless you desire to share their condition, remain where you are, on the couch, until I give you permission to leave." He hurried across to Riley and took off the robe. He picked up the mask from the floor where Riley had tossed it. He hurried out through the door. Verbeck started to get up, but fell back on the couch again. He did not know of the vapor gun, and it was a mystery to him what had happened to Muggs and Riley. He didn't want to be rendered unconscious himself, but there was work to be done if he was allowed to go, or could escape. He wondered how Riley had trailed them and entered the room, and what would happen now that the detective knew the location of the Blackstar's headquarters. Would the master criminal change his mind and hold all three of them prisoners? Would it be impossible to prevent the theft of gold planned for 2 o'clock in the morning? The door opened, and the Blackstar came into the room again. "Detective Riley strikes hard," he observed. "However, my man is conscious again now, and will be with us in a few minutes. The pity of it is that he'll be useless after this, as I've seen his face. I must provide for him and send him away, for I cannot break one of our rules." "Ah, well, it is all in the game, and the game isn't ended yet," Verbeck said. "Angry because I was forced to put your friends asleep, eh?" The Blackstar chuckled. "That puzzles you, perhaps. Merely a vapor gun, Mr. Verbeck, though the vapor itself is somewhat of a secret. See?" He took the vapor gun from beneath his robe, waved it at Verbeck, then returned it. The door opened. There entered a robed and masked man, who staggered as he walked. "You brought the straps?" "Good," the Blackstar said. "We'll just make Detective Riley secure first. Easy now. Don't be rough. Simply because he knocked you on the head, it's all in the game." In a moment, Riley was bound and rolled to a corner of the room. Then the Blackstar held a handkerchief beneath Muggs' nostrils, and almost immediately Muggs sighed and opened his eyes. "That's better. Help me get him to the couch," the master criminal ordered his man. They carried Muggs across the room and put him down beside Verbeck. The Blackstar took out his watch and glanced at it. 9:30, he said. "But for the sudden and unexpected appearance of Riley, you'd be home by this time, Mr. Verbeck, with this man of yours. You must blame Detective Riley for the delay, Mr. Muggs. Feeling better now?" You, Muggs stammered. "No violent language, I pray. Attend me closely now, gentlemen. I promise to send you home, and I'll keep my promise. You must go as you came, of course. Unconscious, you then will be unable to say where this room is located. With Detective Riley, it is different. He evidently trailed somebody to this place. He knows its exact location. I cannot allow him to go free, naturally, after that. I must keep him prisoner for a time. It may be necessary for me to change my headquarters again. Quite a nuisance. If Riley is harmed," Verbeck began. "Tut, tut. I repeat, I abhor violence. But let us not waste more time." He turned to the man beside him. "You understand?" he asked. "The cab is waiting, I believe. Take these 2 men to within a block or so of Mr. Verbeck's residence and drop them there. You must use the vapor gun, of course." Without replying, the man Riley had struck stepped forward, drawing the weapon from beneath his robe. Muggs shrank from him. A touch of the trigger, and Roger Verbeck beheld the cloud of vapor, heard Muggs' futile cry of protest, and saw his comrade in arms topple over on the couch, as if shot through the heart. "Very neat," the Blackstar said. "Carry him out and then return for the other." Muggs was lifted and carried to the door. The Blackstar helped take him into the hallway. Verbeck heard a third man called in low tones, and the master criminal returned. "You see, Mr. Verbeck, it is useless to match wits with me," he said. "A short time ago you thought you had me, eh? And now, the game isn't ended yet, Verbeck interrupted. I believe you said that once before. I care not how long the game endures, if I take all the tricks. Ah, here is our friend again. It is your turn now, Mr. Verbeck. The man with the vapor gun stepped swiftly across the room. Chapter 6. The Blazed Trail. Verbeck's feet were lashed together and his hands tied, but Roger Verbeck refused to despair in the face of even such obstacles as those. He waited until the masked and robed figure with the vapor gun was within 6 feet of him, until the gun was thrown up as if to be discharged, and then, holding his breath and half closing his eyes, Verbeck sprang through the air. It was unexpected, and he crashed against the enemy with such force as to hurl him to the floor. Verbeck regained his balance and sprang nimbly to one side as the Blackstar, growling his anger, started forward. With his lashed wrists held at arm's length before him, Verbeck hopped like a toad across the room and brought up against the wall beside the nearest blackboard. His brain was working as well as his muscles. Through Verbeck's mind flashed the thought that his abduction and that of Muggs, their visit to the Blackstar's headquarters, their knowledge of the crime planned for that night, would be of no value unless he could tell afterward where the headquarters was located. If he inhaled that pungent vapor, he would be able to tell nothing except the appearance of the room's interior. He backed away as the Blackstar and the other man approached him again, with more caution this time. They sprang toward him together, and Verbeck whirled and presented his back. He threw an elbow back sharply as he felt one of them grasp him by the shoulder, and someone grunted in sudden pain as the elbow struck into the pit of his stomach. Both men had their hands on him now, trying to bend him backward with the intention, Verbeck felt sure, of discharging a cloud of vapor into his face and rendering him unconscious. Then he would be carried to the taxicab like a bag of meal, and, after a time, deposited with Muggs near home, there to regain consciousness and remember that the Blackstar held Detective Riley prisoner, and that he did not know where. He struggled as well as he could with his feet and wrists bound. He grasped the end of the blackboard and bent his head, trying to avoid the cloud of vapor he knew was coming. His hands went into the chalk box. Mechanically he grasped 6 pieces of crayon and crushed them in his palm. A sudden wrench, and they bore him backward, working roughly and without speaking. Verbeck saw the vapor gun presented at his face and caught his breath. The trigger was pressed. Vapor filled the air about him. Verbeck held his breath. He staggered backward, the Blackstar still clinging to him. Foot by foot, pretending to grow weaker, he stumbled from the wall and the vapor cloud, fighting himself to keep from taking a breath. At the same time he turned actor. His eyes fluttered. He grew limp, did everything to give the men who gasped him the idea that the vapor had done its work. It seemed that his lungs would burst. Red streaks flashed before his eyes. And then, carefully, slowly, he let air into his nostrils, hoping that the danger was over. That fixed him. The Blackstar broke a rule and spoke in the presence of one of his men, but in a low voice not like his own. They let Verbeck slip down to the floor. He continued his acting, but his eyes did not close entirely. He was breathing regularly now, yet carefully and not deeply, and through his half-closed eyes he watched the vapor gun, fearing it would be turned against him again. That he would be caught off guard and inhale the sleep-producing gas. The Blackstar clapped his hands and hurried to the blackboard. Verbeck heard the squeak of the crayon as he wrote, but could not see what was being written without turning his head, and he did not dare do that. The man who had used the vapor gun bent and took the bonds from Verbeck's wrists and ankles. He caught Verbeck under the arms from behind and lifted him gently and carried him toward the door. He threw the door open. They were in the dark, narrow hallway now, and the door was closed behind them. Verbeck's captor was dragging him along, and Verbeck continued to pretend unconsciousness, allowing his dead weight to rest upon the other man's shoulder. They made a turn, and there another man waited. "Got him," he whispered. "Yes." He put up a scrap. "Wait until I get this gown and mask off." The chauffeur held Verbeck, while the other removed the regalia. Then they took him along the narrow corridor toward the door. Verbeck did not know what instant they would discover he was conscious, and used the vapor gun again to better advantage. He remembered the chalk he still held in one fist. A few chalk marks might serve as a trail and point the way to the Blackstar's den. He moved his fingers until he held one of the sticks of crayon in position for writing. He managed to lurch against the wall and left a long white mark. They made another turn, went up a short flight of steps. Verbeck made more marks. A door was opened, and the cold night air struck them. Outside, Verbeck saw a littered factory yard, with a gate in the distance, and a taxicab waiting before it at the curb. Verbeck continued his acting as they half carried him across the yard to the gate, and there they propped him against the wall for a moment, while the chauffeur glanced up and down the street and started the engine. And when they carried him forward again, Verbeck had left on the gatepost and the wall beside it a series of crosses marked with chalk. They reached the cab. Verbeck managed to break off a small piece of crayon and grind it beneath one heel, leaving a white blotch on the dirty walk. They tossed him inside, and he lurched across the unconscious mugs and fell against the opposite door. The window was open, and Verbeck managed to fall on the seat in such fashion that the hand holding the chalk was extended a few inches out of the window. The chauffeur sprang to his seat. The other man entered the cab and closed the door. The vehicle started away. Now Verbeck's every sense was alert, though he continued to pretend unconsciousness. Born and reared in this city as he was, yet he did not recognize the locality from what he saw through the window of the cab. He could guess what part of the city it was in, but that was all, and there was going to be no time to waste if the Blackstar's headquarters was to be raided in time to prevent the gold theft. It was essential that Verbeck be able to lead police to the scene as speedily as possible. There would be no time to search 15 or 20 blocks for some certain abandoned factory building, when possibly there were a score of such buildings within that area. And a search would warn the Blackstar. There could be but one way to success, a direct and unexpected descent upon the master crook's den. Verbeck noticed that the pavement was rough, cobblestones evidently. He could see little of the buildings he was passing because of the dark. At the first corner he noticed an empty one-story store with boarded windows. Beside it was a billboard flaunting a glaring soap advertisement. These things Verbeck remembered. He counted the blocks until the taxi made the first turn, and there, beneath the arc light on the corner, he dropped a piece of chalk to the street. He was trying to remember the trail, also to mark it, and, at the same time, his brain was active in quite another direction. He wondered whether he should attempt to overpower this man sitting beside him, and the chauffeur, and make an effort to turn these two of the Blackstar's band over to the police. That done, he could call for help and lead the way back to the master criminal's headquarters, possibly capture him at work, and rescue Riley. But the chances of failure were too great. The percentage was against Verbeck. Suppose he tried it and failed? Then the vapor gun would come forth again. He would be rendered unconscious in truth, and left near home with Muggs, and, not having marked the trail, would be unable to lead a squad of police to the Blackstar's place. It was best, Verbeck decided, to continue his acting and try to remember the trail. Whenever the taxi turned a corner, Verbeck dropped more chalk. He also was trying to remember the number of blocks between the turns, and he was gaining some sense of location now. On and on the taxi dashed, until it reached the retail district. Verbeck identified a corner. He was not forced to remember anything more now. He could begin the back trail there. Again he considered whether to attack the man beside him, but he decided against it again. If he did, and failed, the Blackstar would be warned that he had not been unconscious and escape. If he allowed himself to be put out near home with Muggs, he could hurry to the house, inform the police, and begin the effort to frustrate the Blackstar's plans and capture him and some of his band. The taxi sped along a boulevard, made another turn, and lurched toward the curb. They were within 3 blocks of the Verbeck place now, and here giant maple trees lined the street, casting great shadows. It was an ideal place to drop unconscious men without being observed. The taxicab stopped. Verbeck heard the man beside him laugh lightly to himself, and then, why hadn't he anticipated it? He might have guessed the Blackstar's man would use the vapor gun again before putting him out of the cab with Muggs. For fear they might awake too soon and create a disturbance before the taxi got away. Why hadn't he been on guard, ready to hold his breath again and act as before? His senses whirled. Dimly he remembered the chalk trail, the corner from which he was to start, that the possible capture of the Blackstar and the immediate rescue of Riley depended on his memory. And there was something about 100,000 in gold. His head fell forward. He seemed to hear a voice in the distance, and then the dreamless sleep came to him as it had come to Muggs. Chapter 7. At Bay. Nearer, nearer, louder, and more insistent came the voice. Boss, boss. Wake up, boss. Ah, boss, can't you wake up? Verbeck recognized the voice as that of Muggs, but it seemed he was in darkness. And then, rapidly, things cleared. His head whirled again, but this time consciousness was returning to him instead of leaving. Try to sit up, boss. That's the stuff. Now Muggs had an arm around his shoulders and was urging him to bend forward. Verbeck sighed and opened his eyes. He was in the darkness, on the ground between sidewalk and curb. Why? What? He gasped. Memory returned to him with a rush. He struggled to get to his feet, and Muggs aided him, and they staggered toward the walk. The Blackstar's headquarters. Riley held prisoner, the chalk trail, the vapor gun. Verbeck remembered all and was roused to action. One moment, Muggs. I'm dizzy, he complained. Just let us stand here a minute or so, then we'll get busy. When I came to, you were dead to the world, boss. Ain't it the deuce? Where do you suppose them headquarters are, eh? And how are we going to get Riley out? Things aren't as bad as they seem, Muggs. I know a thing or two. Did they shoot that stuff at you as soon as they put me to sleep? They did, Muggs, but it didn't take effect. What's that, boss? I fought them. Muggs held my breath. I pretended to be unconscious, and they carried me to the taxi. They didn't put me to sleep until just before we were taken out of the cab. I got caught off guard then. Boss. You. Exactly, Muggs. I've an idea where the Blackstar has his headquarters. Come along. I'm all right now. We've got to hurry to the house. Side by side they hurried down the street, went around the corner, and so came to the old Verbeck place. Once inside the gate, they ran at top speed to the front door, unlocked it, hurried inside. Muggs snapped on the lights. Roger Verbeck rushed to the telephone and called police headquarters and asked for the chief. Hello? Chief, he said. This is Roger Verbeck. He was fighting to keep the note of excitement from his voice, for Verbeck knew the chief well. Communicate excitement to the chief, and he would want to call out the reserves, make a noise, alarm every crook in the city, and so accomplish nothing. Listen well, Chief, he said now, and please do not interrupt, and do exactly as I say. I've been to the Blackstar's headquarters. Wait. Keep quiet, Chief, and listen. We'll get along better if we take things coolly. Yes, I've been inside the headquarters. He had me knocked out at a restaurant and took me there. He had Muggs abducted and taken there. His intention was to let us see the place, and then send us away unconscious, and give us the laugh because we couldn't find the place again. But, wait, Verbeck commanded. While we were there, he even let us see orders given his men. They've planned a big trick for tonight. They are going to steal 100,000 in gold coin at 2 o'clock in the morning. It is a shipment that arrived at noon today. Understand? Get the wheels in motion down there and find out what bank or trust company received that shipment and have their place well guarded. Yes, I. Wait. Now listen carefully. While we were there, Detective Riley showed up. I don't know how he got there. We had things going our way for a time, but the Blackstar turned the tables on us, as usual. He's got Riley there now, a prisoner. Wait, confound you. And listen, I'm home. Muggs and I were dumped here unconscious. Get your fastest machine. I don't know where my roadster is. And come out here with 2 of your best men. Get here as soon as you can. Only 2 men, Chief. If you bring any more, we'll raise a racket and lose out entirely. No questions. Hurry. Verbeck hung up the receiver before the chief could reply. That he knew was the way to get quick action out of the head of the city's police department. But how are we going to find that place, boss? Muggs demanded. Verbeck held up a hand for silence. He was pacing back and forth across the room, his brow wrinkled, head bent, cracking his fingers nervously. 2, 5, 3, 8. Were those numbers correct? Had Verbeck returned to consciousness with the right numbers photographed on his brain? 2, 5, 3, 8. And then the corner he knew and had identified. He'd have to reverse the numbers, of course. From the coma, 8 blocks to where the taxicab had made the turn, then 3 blocks to the next turn. But which direction? The chalk would tell if it could be found. In a few words, he explained to Muggs what he had done and that the chances for success were slim. The small pieces of crayon might be gone. They might have to retrace their steps a score of times. And every minute was precious. It was after 10 o'clock now. They'd have to find the Blackstar's headquarters within a short time to catch him there. Undoubtedly, members of the band would report at a late hour to get final instructions regarding the theft of the gold. If only several of them could be captured. If Riley could be released before harm befell him. But there'd be no time to waste. Down the street came the shrieking of a siren. Now curse the chief for a fool, Verbeck cried. 2/3 of the city will know we're on the trail before we've gone 2 blocks. It is our game for the Blackstar to think we have no idea where his headquarters can be found. That we were dead to the world when we left to be brought here. Muggs swung the door open as the police machine stopped before the gate, and the chief and 2 of his men charged up the walk toward the veranda. Verbeck met them at the top of the steps. Listen, he commanded. Let's have no noise. The slightest alarm may spoil our plans. I'll tell you what I've done. He spoke rapidly, clearly. He told what had transpired in the Blackstar's den about Riley, how he had remained conscious and left the chalk trail. He kept murmuring the numbers he had to remember until Muggs handed him a pencil. Then he wrote the numbers on his cuff. No siren, he ordered. Drive to the National Building corner first. That's where we take up the trail. I've got men busy telephoning, the chief reported, as the machine darted down the boulevard. If there's a bank or trust company got that gold shipment, there'll be a crowd of police in their building within half an hour. And if we get the Blackstar and some of his men... Muggs and I have spotted 2 of his men, Verbeck said. Muggs can identify the one who abducted him, and the chauffeur. And I got a good look at the one who rode in the cab with us, though I couldn't identify the chauffeur very well. But you can lay a wager right now, Chief, that those men will receive a roll of bills each and be sent out of town at once. The Blackstar, you understand, knows we have seen them. Their usefulness for him is at an end. Here's your corner, the chauffeur cried. Verbeck stood up in the machine and looked around him, then glanced at his cuff to be sure he was making no mistake. Drive south 8 blocks, he ordered. Then stop. The machine sped away. The destination was reached. Verbeck sprang out and looked around at the pavement. He gave a glad cry and ran toward one curb. There in the street was a white blotch, where the heavy wheel of some vehicle had run over and crushed a piece of chalk. "You see?" he cried. A moment now. He looked at his cuff again. 3 blocks this time, but in what direction, I do not know. I didn't have a chance to see very well, remember. All I know is that the taxi made another turn 3 blocks from this corner. They went toward the west first, and on the 3rd corner searched without success for the bit of chalk. There was a small searchlight on the car, and with it they swept the pavement for 100 feet in every direction. They found no trace of chalk. They went to the next corner, thinking Verbeck might have made a mistake counting the number of blocks, and again they searched without reward. Back to the first corner they hurried, and this time went to the east. Before they had searched the 3rd corner there less than a minute, Verbeck found what they sought. The chalk had not been crushed here, but here it was, close to the curb. Verbeck consulted his cuff again. 5 blocks, he said. It must be 5 blocks north or south. We know the place we want to find is in the manufacturing district somewhere, so the best guess is south. Again the machine dashed down the street. Once more they descended and searched the pavement. Muggs, the chief, the 2 detectives from headquarters joined in the search. The chauffeur operated the searchlight and flooded the street with brilliance. There was no sign of chalk. "Down another block. Maybe you made a mistake," the chief said. They hurried to the next corner. It was nearly 11 o'clock. Unless the chalk could be found, they would have no direct trail to follow, and a systematic search of the manufacturing district would take hours and put the Blackstar on guard. 5-minute search convinced them there was no chalk on this corner. They got into the machine and turned back to the last corner where they had found the chalk. "I'm sure I counted 5 blocks," Verbeck said. "Perhaps it is in the other direction." "I've got it," one of the detectives cried. "See that private alley? You counted that. It's the 4th corner instead of the 5th. They stopped on the 4th corner. There was a blotch of white on the pavement. The police machine itself had made it by crushing the chalk as it passed. "Now what?" the chief demanded. 2 blocks, said Verbeck. "And that's all I could remember when I regained consciousness. 2 blocks to another piece of chalk, and after that, a considerable run without a turn. We'll have to go blind until I see something that recalls the locality." 2 blocks they journeyed at top speed, 2 blocks to the east, and there they found the bit of crayon in the middle of the street. Once more Verbeck stood up in the car and looked down the intersecting thoroughfares. "Try that," he said, and pointed to the south again. "Drive slowly." The machine went on. Block after block they passed, while Verbeck searched the side of the street, trying to spot some building he remembered. And then he saw a 1-story empty building with boarded windows. "Stop," he ordered. "To the curb." "I remember this. We're within 2 blocks of the place. We'll leave the machine here and go ahead on foot." Only the chauffeur remained behind. Verbeck led the way, with Muggs at his side, and behind came the chief and the 2 headquarters detectives. They passed the 1st corner, and then Verbeck began walking slower, watching the curb line, glancing at the gateway of every factory fence. "There," he whispered. He pointed to the curb, to the chalk smeared on the walk there, where he had ground it with his heel as they were putting him into the taxicab. "This is the place," he said, and led the way to the gate. There were the crosses he had marked. They were at the end of the trail. The building was small and stood in the middle of the lot, with a fence entirely around it. It did not communicate with another building, and was easily surrounded. "There's the door they use," Verbeck said. "Through a hall, down half a flight of steps to another hall in the basement, a few steps along that, and you come to the door of the room that holds the Blackstar." "What do you consider the best plan?" the chief asked. "It is bright moonlight. We can see every square foot of the yard. Suppose your 2 men keep near the fence and watch the sides of the building. You too, Chief. I'll take Muggs and enter. We'll go prepared for trouble and try to spring a surprise. We'll get into that room some way, and there'll be action as soon as we do. You'll just have to guess from anything you hear whether it'll be best to remain outside on guard or enter the building to help. But Riley, the chief began, I suppose he is in there, unless he has been taken away by some of the Blackstar's men. If he is there, we must rescue him, of course, so he can aid us. Better let me send in a call. No, Verbeck interrupted. We can do that later if it proves necessary. A surprise, swift action by just a few of us may turn the trick. A bunch of reserves would alarm the gang. If we do not do that, we may be able to pick up several of them if they come to report or receive orders. All right, the chief replied. You go on in with Muggs, and we'll watch the outside and be ready to make a rush if you need help. You're armed, of course. I'm not, I forgot. Neither is Muggs. The Blackstar relieved us of our automatics and failed to return them. The chief stepped to the curb and signaled the distant chauffeur, and the headquarters automobile came to them swiftly. The chauffeur handed his automatic to Verbeck, and Muggs received a revolver that was in the machine. The chief and chauffeur were to hold the gate. A detective slipped along the fence in each direction, keeping to the shadows, trying to get to a post where 2 sides of the building could be watched. Verbeck spoke softly to Muggs, and they stepped out into the bright moonlight and started walking swiftly across the yard toward the little door. Verbeck had but one fear, that the Blackstar, his plans for the night's crime completed, had left the headquarters and gone to whatever place he called home. There would be nothing to do then except watch the empty nest. But if the Blackstar and some of his men were in the building, a flash of flame came from one of the windows. A bullet whistled past Verbeck and Muggs and struck the fence near the gate. Another flash of flame, another bullet. Get out of that moonlight, they heard the chief shriek. On another side of the building, there was a shot from a window, and one of the detectives replied to it. Verbeck and Muggs dashed back to the fence and got in the shadows. More shots flashed from windows. The Blackstar, evidently, was in his headquarters with some of his men, at bay, forgetting his abhorrence of violent methods, giving battle in an effort to escape the police he had scorned. Chapter 8. The Voice of Desperation. The chief crept slowly along the fence until he stood beside Verbeck and Muggs. "They're on to us," he exclaimed. "They must have had somebody watching. Afraid Riley had given the tip before he was caught, I suppose. Now we've got to smoke 'em out." Shots came at intervals from some of the windows, and now and then one of the detectives fired in return. The chief spoke a few rapid words to the chauffeur, and in an instant the machine was tearing down the street, the siren shrieking. "Told him to send in an alarm," the chief explained. "No use trying to handle this thing by ourselves, Verbeck. We'll have a sweet time getting in there. But we've got 'em. Thank heaven, it's an easy place to surround, and if they try to come out, we'll get every last one of them. This will be the end of the Blackstar. But I'm afraid for Riley, if he's still in there. These smooth crooks are always the worst when they get cornered. They forget they're human. I wouldn't put it past the Blackstar to do for old Riley, if he finds he's up against a losing game." More shots from the windows. Then a lull. It was somewhat of a ticklish situation. Here were 5 men guarding the 4 sides of the building, and it was impossible to say how many were inside. If the master criminal and his men made a rush, some of them might escape. Crouching nervously in the shadows of the fence, the 5 waited, straining their ears to hear sounds that would tell of the coming of a police machine. Minutes passed, and there came no rush of determined and desperate men from the building. Verbeck remembered the Blackstar's cleverness, began wondering whether there was some sort of underground passage through which he could lead his men to safety. Again, a fusillade of shots, and he knew they still were in the building. did the fusillade herald a rush for freedom. Gripping their weapons, those near the fence waited, but the rush did not come. And then, from far down the street, came the shrieks of a siren, rapidly drawing nearer. The chief gave a sigh of relief. He left Verbeck and Muggs and hurried through the gate and to the curb. The machine turned the nearest corner and dashed up to him, and half a dozen police sprang out. Another siren in the distance. Another machine. The chief had reinforcements of some 15 men now. He explained the situation rapidly, sent his men to surround the building. When those inside fired again, they drew a volley in reply. "Give it to 'em hot for a while," the chief passed the word. "We won't try any rushes yet. Can't be losing men. Get too much criticism, and it isn't necessary. Make it so hot they can't stay near the windows. Give it to 'em." From all four sides of the factory building, volleys were poured at windows and doors, and from the windows came answering shots, now in twos and threes, now with such rapidity that it seemed at least a score of men were on the defensive there. "How many crooks has he got with him, do you suppose?" the chief asked. "That is what puzzles me," Verbeck admitted. "According to his usual methods, there never are more than 2 or 3 men besides himself at the headquarters at any one time. Well, it looks to me like there's a couple of dozen in there now." "Perhaps," Verbeck offered, "we caught them just at the right time to nab quite a number. According to what was written on the blackboards, 6 men were to steal the gold, and they may be there for final orders. There may have been other crimes contemplated for tonight too, or it is possible there is a grand gathering of the band for a distribution of money from other thefts. I have ceased to be surprised at anything unusual connected with the Blackstar." "Well, we've got him now," the chief said. "It will be the same old story of police besieging desperate men barricaded in a building. They'll hold us off just so long, and then we'll get in. And I'll bet we find him a suicide when we do. He made the remark tonight that when the time came he would know how to die, even if he had to descend to suicide. There you are. Those smooth crooks always do that. Can't stand the thought of prison. Well, we'll end his work anyway. We'll get him, either dead or alive." There came another lull in the battle, and then another volley from the windows. From one side of the building came a shriek of pain. "Barton's hit." The word travelled along the line to the chief. "He's got it bad. Through the breast." The chief sent orders to have the man removed and hurried to a hospital. "That's the thing I'm afraid of," he confided to Verbeck. "I want to get the Blackstar, but I don't want to lose men. And those fiends in the factory, if they think they're cornered, will shoot to kill." Another shriek of pain from the side of the building. The chief muttered a curse as he slipped away, following the fence, going to see what man of his had been wounded now. "How long they going to keep this up, boss?" Muggs whispered to Verbeck. "They are cornered, Muggs, and you know what that means. I suppose they'll keep it up until the Blackstar is dead, and the others decide to surrender and take their medicine rather than to die. I'm sorry about this. I had hoped the 3 of us would get the Blackstar alone, without gunplay." "Why don't they go in and get him?" Muggs demanded, with a tinge of disgust in his tone. "It could be done, but we might lose men," Verbeck said. "They can't leave the building without facing police guns, and we're sure to get them in time. The chief intends to batter at them, wear them down, then make a rush when they realize they are losing the fight. They'd fight twice as desperately now, at the beginning of the battle, as they will later, when their nerves are on edge and the truth of the situation dawns on them. Then we're just going to stand off and fight long distance," Muggs said. "If we'd get in the building, we'd end it quicker." "I realize that, Muggs, but between the shadows of this fence and the nearest door is a patch of bright moonlight 50 feet wide. Why take chances in that bright moonlight when, by playing a waiting game, we win without such grave chances? Eh?" "Well, you see, boss, Riley is in there." I realize that too, Muggs, And Riley is a good scout. I had a little run-in with him once, when I thought he believed I wasn't square, but I'm strong for him now. I understand, Muggs. And he had a nerve corning in the headquarters like he did, in that mask and robe. And he did it to help us out, I'll bet, as much as to get the Blackstar. You want to make a rush for it and get in the factory? Is that it, Muggs? Well, I'd take a chance, boss, to help Riley. This game belongs to the three of us anyway. The police are just backing us up, you might say. The chief slipped back to them through the shadows. I got a little of that conversation, he said. It would be foolish to make such an attempt now. We just have more men in there in trouble. Why, I've known Riley for years. Knew him before I ever got in the department. I'd be the first man to go across that patch of moonlight if I thought it would help. Well, Muggs said, we'd walk into trouble. We can tell there's from a dozen to a score of men in there, and they're desperate, ready to die with their boots on like the old-time bandits did. Suppose 2 or 3 of us did get across that moonlight and get in the building. We might whip the dozen or score, and again we might not. And if I order a rush now, I'm going to lose men. I don't want to do that. We'll just batter away at them for a time first. I've sent for searchlights. Searchlights? Verbeck gasped. I can connect with a power wire at the corner of the alley. We'll flood every window with light, so not a man will dare get in one of them to shoot. And then, when the proper time comes, we'll rush and get into the building. I've sent for more men, too. More men? Verbeck asked. Exactly. More men. 2 of my men are down now, and one of them is liable to die. Nothing in this town is as important, right now, as getting the Blackstar, no matter whether we arrest him or kill him trying to. We've got him cornered. We know that. He's got some of his gang with him. And the police department drops everything else until we finish this. All the reserves are coming. Every policeman in the city now on duty is getting orders to report here as soon as possible when he pulls a box. I'm stripping the town of police to throw a police army around this block. It'll never be said we had him surrounded and that he got away. Here's where we finish the Blackstar. If news of this is scattered around town, Verbeck began. It is scattered around town already. The call for the reserves scattered it. There'll be extra editions of the papers on the street in another quarter hour, or I'll miss a guess. And then we'll have a mob down here, several thousand fools who want to see the scrap and won't have any more sense than to try to see it at close range. I want men to handle the fool mob as well as surround the block. There came another lull in the firing. No flashes of flame showed at the windows. On the outside, the police refilled weapons and waited, half expecting a delayed rush, ready to close in and balk an attempt at escape. An instant of comparative silence, and in that instant a voice, deep, striking staccato, that seemed to come from the interior of the factory, but could be heard plainly. "No quarter," it cried. "We're cornered. Die game. Get as many as you can. They'll never get me alive." A confused murmur came as if in answer. "Good," the voice cried. "That's the boys. Make every shot count. After them." Another fusillade of shots from the windows, and answering volleys from the police. Verbeck bent close to the chief, so that the latter could hear him above the din. "That was the Blackstar," he said. "You were right. He'll die with his boots on, and he'll get as many of us as he can before he dies." Chapter 9. Muggs goes to try. The rattling of pistol shots continued. From every direction, police officers hurried toward the block and reported either to the chief or one of the captains. Lines were stretched 2 blocks away on every side, and behind the ropes gathered scores of automobiles that had carried hundreds of morbidly curious persons to the scene of battle. Throughout the city had flashed the news that the Blackstar and his band of criminals had been surrounded by the police in an abandoned factory building, and that a siege was in progress. Rumors told of the death of Roger Verbeck in a duel with the master criminal, others that the Blackstar had escaped, and only some of his men were surrounded. Still others that a dozen policemen had been wounded, and some slain. Held in check by the ropes and the police guard, the throng, ever increasing, passed these rumors around and invented new ones on the spur of the moment. Police arriving from suburban districts had to fight their way through the jam to get to the battle line. The sheriff, hearing of the siege, journeyed to the spot with his deputies to offer his aid to the police. A frantic mayor, unable to get into communication with the head of his police department, debated whether to visit the scene of conflict or wire the governor of the state for the use of militia. The first hysteria passed, as it always does. The throngs behind the ropes settled down to a steady wait, plying police officers for late information. The sheriff and his deputies mingled with the city's officers on the firing line. The mayor remembered that. Only a few criminals were in that building, and that it would be a reflection on his administration to ask the governor for help. The searchlights arrived and were connected. Floods of light bathed the factory building, but they did not stop the volleys of bullets. Officers poured leaden hail through those windows, until it looked as if no man could approach one near enough to fire out, yet from the factory's interior came answering shots. A perspiring chief crept close to Roger Verbeck again. "Please come with me, Mr. Verbeck. You and your man," he said. "The mayor wants to speak to you." Verbeck and Muggs, hugging the wall and so keeping in the darkness, followed the chief to the gate and dashed through it. The mayor stood against the wall outside, half a dozen other officials with him. "We ask your advice, Mr. Verbeck," he said. "You believe the Blackstar is in that building?" "I heard his voice urging his men," Verbeck replied. "And how many men do you believe he has with him?" "Frankly, I have no idea, sir. I am insisting that the chief have his men rush the building, Mr. Verbeck. He tells me it would be a foolish thing to do at this juncture. I am of the opinion that few, if any, policemen would be wounded making the dash to the doors. Kindly remember," Verbeck said, "that getting inside the doors is not all of it. Once inside, there'll be a hand-to-hand fight. I know the Blackstar, Mr. Mayor. He is a tricky individual. He had traps in his other headquarters, and he may have in this. Are we to do this sort of thing forever, then?" "I believe the chief is taking the right method," Verbeck replied. "He is flooding the place with light now. If they continue the fight, they must appear at the windows to fire, and sooner or later some of them will be wounded. A few wounded men, a few hours of this continual warfare, and the men inside that building will lose heart. I understand Detective Riley, an old and tried officer, is held prisoner in the building. The last I knew of him, he was," Verbeck said. It seems peculiar to me that you and your man could not have overcome this Blackstar when you were in the room with him and Riley had him covered. I understand he defeated the three of you." "He did," Verbeck admitted. "Muggs and I were bound hand and foot. The Blackstar took a chance and smashed the only lamp in the room. In the darkness, he overcame Riley and Muggs with a vapor gun he uses. The rest was simple, since I was helpless." "Say," Muggs shoved his way forward and confronted the city's chief executive. "Have you got the nerve to stand here and bawl at my boss, because we got the worst of it?" "Why, he's got more nerve than you and all your police together." "Muggs," Verbeck shouted. "Well, it makes me mad. Why are we mixed up in this thing anyway? Because the police can't handle the job. That's why. And now the mayor tries to bawl us out." "My good man," the mayor began. He was an aristocratic mayor. "Don't you good man me. Want to rush in there, do you? Peel your coat, Mr. Mayor. Get a gun and come on. I'll lead the way, if you'll follow. Riley's my friend. I'll lead the way." "Well," Verbeck smothered a grin. The chief turned away quickly to hide the twinkle in his eyes. We'll just drop the subject," the mayor said. Perhaps the chief knows best. A volley of shots came from the building. Volleys from the police answered it. "Some shooting," Muggs exclaimed. "And it takes just one of them bullets, just one, to do considerable damage to a man. Want to rush in, Mayor?" "That'll do, Muggs," Verbeck commanded. "The mayor is all right. He just didn't quite understand. Well, if he thinks we haven't got nerve enough to go in, you might tell him we'd have been in there before this. Except that the chief is commanding officer and said to stay out." "There is no question of your courage, Muggs, nor of yours, Mr. Verbeck," the mayor said quickly. "Let us drop the subject and await developments." The firing ceased for an instant. From the factory came a chorus of such shrieks as a man undergoing torture might make. If that's Riley," Muggs said. He whirled suddenly upon Verbeck. "Let me go, boss," he implored. "If I can get in all right, I'll take a chance afterward. If that's Riley." "No, Muggs." "Oh, boss, just turn off the searchlight from that door. It won't take me a second to run across. I'll take a chance. I might do something where a gang of police couldn't. I might be able to pick 'em off. Perhaps that would be a good idea," the mayor said. Verbeck whirled upon the city's executive, and the mayor involuntarily took a step backward. He realized he had said the wrong thing, and he didn't care to antagonize Roger Verbeck, for Verbeck had political influence. "Muggs' life is worth as much as that of any man," Verbeck said. "He's not getting paid to do such a thing, and your police are. I refuse to say I thought the police ought to go in. You might do as much for my friend. I didn't think," the mayor stammered. The shooting was continuous now. Despite the glare of the searchlights on the windows, shots came from the factory. Verbeck found himself wondering why they did not shoot at the searchlights. Perhaps they had, and had proved poor marksmen, he thought. Certainly they were not hitting many policemen, for none had been wounded except the two early in the fray. Yet the police, of course, fought from the shadows. More officers struggled through the crowd and reached the firing line. Word reached the chief from the central station that all men had been sent to him, except a dozen or so who remained there, and at the precinct stations to receive telephone messages and issue alarms in case of an emergency. The cordon around the factory was as strong as the chief could make it without swearing in special officers. And he had enough men. It would be impossible for any of the Blackstar's band to escape. It was unusual, this stripping the city of defenders by gathering them all at one spot, but both the chief and the mayor felt the situation justified it. For months the Blackstar and his men had terrorized the city. Every attempt to capture them had failed. Banks had been raided, jewels stolen, citizens were demanding protection, and now that he had the Blackstar in his headquarters, it was policy to make it impossible for him to escape. "Boss," Muggs implored, "it'd be a cinch, and Riley's in there. If you go, Muggs, I go with you." "No, boss. Just let me take the chance. I ain't worth much anyway, boss. I've had my fling. And you're going to get married, and all that. You stay here, boss, and let me go. Just have 'em turn off that searchlight a minute." "No, Muggs." "But old Riley." "I know, Muggs, but we must wait. I've always done as you wanted me to, boss. Can't I have my own way this once? Let me go." "No," Verbeck answered again. "It would be foolish, Muggs. You'd only get into trouble yourself, and you'd not be able to help Riley, perhaps. I could try." Another fusillade of shots. More shrieks from the factory. It seemed to Muggs that those shrieks sounded like Riley. In the past 10 days, he had learned to think a great deal of Riley. And he hated the Blackstar. To think of the Blackstar torturing Riley, killing him. A cry from the mayor caused the chief and Verbeck to whirl around. Muggs, revolver in hand, had run out into the path of light. "Muggs!" Verbeck shrieked, but Muggs did not seem to hear. He turned around, threw up his revolver, and fired. The lens of the searchlight was shattered. The path of bright light that illumined the door died away. A shadowy form darted in zigzag fashion toward the factory. Muggs had gone to try. Chapter 10. In the doorway. Roger Verbeck, millionaire and clubman, wealthy son of a wealthy father, realized in that moment what true brotherhood means. His relations with Muggs flashed through his mind. Muggs, derelict of destiny, crook, offspring of scum. Verbeck had picked him up in Paris one night when Muggs, weary of existence, was about to throw himself into the Seine. Muggs was at the points those who tread the paths of crime often reach. Disgusted with what he had made of his life, seeing no hope of living differently, ready to die rather than continue. Verbeck saved him. Muggs became an honest man. They had been comrades since, a peculiar comradeship that caused comment because of the difference between them. Now Verbeck remembered the adventures through which they had passed. Why, Muggs had even saved his life once, and now Muggs had gone into that factory, facing almost certain death, gone to the rescue of a man he did not know 2 weeks before, simply because he admired that man. Should not Roger Verbeck, then, stand by Muggs, whom he had known for 5 years, with whom he had stood shoulder to shoulder in many battles? Verbeck forgot his wealth, his station in life, even his fiancée, and the happiness in store for him. He remembered only Muggs, who often had fought for him, who now was facing danger, perhaps death, without Verbeck by his side. Acting on the impulse that had come to him, Verbeck started forward. "Oh, no, you don't." It was the chief who spoke, who grasped Verbeck around the waist and called to 2 officers near for help. "We can't allow it, Mr. Verbeck," he said. "I'm sorry Muggs went in. Certainly we cannot allow you to throw your life away." "Then send in your men. Muggs has gone because Riley, one of your detectives, is in there." "Soon, but not just yet," the chief said. "We must batter them more first." He signed to the 2 officers to watch Verbeck, and then hurried away to have another searchlight turned on the doorway in place of the one Muggs had smashed. Verbeck, raging, walked back and forth along the fence, and Muggs, meantime, was crouching just inside the door, recovering breath after his dash. Muggs was the fighter, the killer now. His lower jaw was shot forward again, his lips set tightly over his teeth, his eyes narrowed. He buttoned his coat tightly across his breast and pulled his cap down low over his eyes. Gripping the revolver, holding it in front of him ready for instant use, he began to creep slowly along the hallway. When Muggs had passed through that hallway before, he had been unconscious, hence he knew nothing concerning it. And he did not dare strike a match. He was not sure his dash for the door had been unobserved. He made his way forward slowly through the blackness, his left hand continually feeling the wall. He reached the short flight of steps and felt his way down them, stopping now and then to listen. From outside came the rattle of revolver tire. From the rooms above him came the answering shots. Muggs realized he was in the basement of the building, and he wanted to get to the first floor. He came, presently, to the other hall, to the stairs, and went up, one step at a time, ready for instant battle, trying to hear the voices of the Blackstar's men. But it was the voice of the Blackstar himself that he heard. "At them!" it shrieked. "No quarter! Die like men!" Muggs could not locate the voice in the din. He was not sure from which room it came. He crept on along the hallway until he reached an open door. There he hesitated a moment. Then, holding his weapon ready, he peered into the room. The searchlight did not penetrate here, and the only illumination was reflected from the wall outside the one window. Not a person was in the room. "At them! Die like men! No quarter!" Muggs decided the voice of the Blackstar came from another room down the hall. Again he went forward, always alert, expecting every instant that one of the master criminal's men would run into the hall and discover him. He came to another door and found it closed. He stopped to listen. Yes, shots were being fired from that room, and a searchlight flooded it too, for the strong light came from beneath the door. To open that door meant to face bullets, perhaps, and Muggs did not want to do that unnecessarily until B had found Riley, or the Blackstar. He heard the Blackstar's voice again, and it seemed to come from the basement. He went on along the hall and turned to the right. Before him, a streak of bright light swept the floor. The door of the next room was open. Crouching at the turn in the hall, Muggs listened and watched. He knew shots were being fired from that room too, and bullets were being poured into it by the police. Some of them came through the door and crashed into the wall. He heard the Blackstar's voice again and turned back. It would avail little, Muggs knew, to clash with some of the Master Crook's men. A single shot might strike him down, and his effort would have been in vain. He wondered where Riley was being kept. He wondered where the Blackstar could be found. He didn't want to go out without either trying to help Riley or getting the Blackstar if Riley had met with foul play. Back along the hall he went, listening for sounds that would tell him how to meet the Blackstar or his men to best advantage. He came to another flight of steps and went down them. The master criminal's voice came to him again, and Muggs could distinguish from which direction now. Once more in the lower hall, he turned to the left and crept along the wall. The voice was louder, more distinct. "Die game, no quarter, that's the boys." Muggs hurried on. In the distance he saw a faint streak of light. When he got nearer he saw that it came from the side of a door. Here was a time for extreme caution, and Muggs used it. He stopped again to listen. The rattling of revolver shots continued, and the voice of the Blackstar rose above the din. Muggs crept forward to the door. The Blackstar was in that room, a sudden entrance, and Muggs might get him covered. And at the first move he would shoot. He'd be quicker than Riley had been. He'd be watching for treachery. Even if they got him, he'd get the Blackstar first. Now he was beside the door. The crack at the side, through which the light came, was wide enough to give a man a glance at the room's interior. Muggs put an eye to the crack. He recognized the room instantly, for it was the headquarters room. He saw Detective Riley, bound and gagged, stretched on the couch in the corner, tossing from side to side. The lamp without a chimney was smoking on the table, casting its uncertain light. But it gave light enough for Muggs to see around the room, and as he looked, he gasped in astonishment. Outside, by the gate, Roger Verbeck was raging at the chief and the mayor. Once more a searchlight bathed the doorway in brilliance. The volleys of shots continued, and answering shots came from the factory. Throngs of people were behind the police ropes 2 blocks away. Rumors were flying again. 20 policemen had been killed. The criminals were breaking out. The police were going to take the place by assault. The chief was holding a conference with some of his captains, and plans for the assault were made. The searchlights would go out for an instant when a whistle was blown. A score of officers would rush for the doors, while the others volleyed bullets at the building's windows. The halls would be seized, and the Blackstar's men driven from room to room until they surrendered or gave intimation that they would die fighting. Verbeck, automatic in hand, braced himself for the race across to the door. He intended to be one of the first inside the building. The chief could not hold him back when the police rushed. The orders were passed around. The searchlight operators were warned. There came another lull in the fighting, and the chief started to raise his whistle to his lips to give the signal. But a cry from one of the captains stopped him. "Look! Look in the door!" A stick had appeared there, a stick to the end of which was attached a white handkerchief, a flag of truce. Orders to cease firing sped down the lines of police. The white handkerchief was waved frantically. Gradually the firing died out. Not a shot came from the factory. The man in the doorway evidently wanted to be sure his appearance would not be greeted with a volley. He continued to wave the handkerchief from the end of the stick, not even his hand showing. "Well?" the chief bellowed. "What do you want?" Another moment's wait, and then Detective Riley appeared in the open door. As the cheers of the police greeted his appearance, Muggs suddenly stood beside him. "It's all right, boss," he called to Verbeck. "Come on in." Chapter 11. On the blackboard. Riley and Muggs blocked the doorway. "Better keep everyone out except a choice few," Riley said to the chief in a low voice. "You come, and Mr. Verbeck, possibly one of the captains. That'll be enough." Something in the tone of his voice caused the chief to look at him with quick suspicion and caused Roger Verbeck to glance with apprehension at Muggs. But neither Riley nor Muggs gave them a sign as to what they were to expect. The chief, however, took the hint. He selected one captain to go along and ordered another to guard the doorway and keep everyone out of the building for the present. The mayor had not been courageous enough to leave the gate. Flashing his electric torch, Riley led the way down the hall and steps, and to the door of the headquarters room, the others crowding after him. Verbeck got a chance to whisper to Muggs, "What is it?" "Just another little trick." "But wait, boss, you'll have to see it." The door of the headquarters room was closed, but Riley threw it open, and they stepped inside. The chief and his captain gasped when they saw the rich furnishings. But they were not new to Verbeck, and his glance wandered elsewhere. Everything seemed the same as when he had been there before, except there was a phonograph with a gigantic horn on the mahogany table. The Blackstar, his men, the chief implored. "None here," Riley answered. "Nonsense. They couldn't have escaped. Unless there's a tunnel of some sort." "There is no tunnel. Neither the Blackstar nor any of his men has been in this building since you arrived." "But," the bewildered chief gasped. "Why, nonsense. Haven't they been shooting at us? Haven't we heard him screeching to his crooks?" Riley pointed to the phonograph. "That is what you heard," he said. "But the shooting, let me tell it in my own way, Chief, and we'll get at it quicker. After I was put out by that blamed vapor gun, which the Blackstar kindly explained to me afterward, I came back to life to find that Verbeck and Muggs had been taken away. I supposed, naturally, that they had been doped first and would be unable to find the place again. Since I did know the whereabouts of this place, I supposed the Blackstar intended to keep me where I'd not do him any harm. The first thing he did was to assure me I'd not meet with violence, and that Verbeck soon would be back. But, wait, Chief, I want you to get this straight. After that, the Blackstar went ahead to explain a few things, gave me the laugh, took off his robe and mask, put on his coat and hat, and bade me adieu as cheerfully as you please. That was within 10 minutes after Muggs and Verbeck had been taken away, and I've been the only man in this building since until Muggs stumbled in here a few minutes ago." "Nonsense. The shooting," the chief persisted. "Oh, there is an explanation of all that. By the way, what time is it?" 3 o'clock, answered the captain, after glancing at his watch. "Then he's done it." "Done what?" the chief cried. "Got away with 100,000 in gold coin. He said he was going to, didn't he? But the shooting." The chief could think of nothing else. "Look at the 2 blackboards," Riley said. "You'll find your explanation there. Read the one to your right first." They whirled to read. Verbeck, with sinking heart, was reading it already, and this was the message the Blackstar had left. "To Roger Verbeck and any others it may concern. If you are reading this, it probably means that all my plans have been successful, as they are generally. I have scant time, and must be brief. First, this is not really my new headquarters, but one fitted up for this special occasion. I arranged to have Verbeck or Muggs abducted and carried here. Accidentally both were captured, but that made no difference. I allowed them to overhear certain plans, knowing that afterward they would help carry them out. Detective Riley's arrival was unexpected and threatened disaster, but happily I gained the upper hand. I will leave him here and trust he meets with no harm. Mr. Verbeck, your struggle to keep from inhaling the vapor was amusing, since there was no sleep-producing vapor in the gun used on you. It was a harmless gas instead. It was intended that you were to think you were outwitting me by remaining conscious. I knew you would strive to make sure of the location of this building. The same plan would have been worked with Muggs had he been captured alone. It was very clever of you to take the chalk, and I doubt not you marked everything along your way. You have departed now, feigning unconsciousness, and I must hurry away. Just a few words, then, to tell you what will happen. Now read the other blackboard, Riley said. Oh, it is interesting, all right. The crook. They turned to the second blackboard and read, You, Mr. Verbeck, and I'd wager my life on it, will send an alarm to police headquarters as soon as you reach home and regain consciousness. For my man will use the real vapor gun on you before you separate, to give me time to get away. You will find your way here again as soon as possible, to rescue Riley and catch me. When you arrive, you'll be fired upon. A disturbance will be created, and police reserves sent for. The firing from this building will be heavy. The chief, eager to catch me, will call for more men. You'll start a siege. You'll batter this old building with bullets. You'll receive bullets in return. You'll hear my voice urging my men to die game. Presently you'll rush in and find this. And while the town is attracted by this disturbance and the business district left practically unprotected, I'll get my 100,000 in gold. I'll not make the attempt, of course, unless you do start a siege. The writing ended, for the blackboard was filled with it. But the shooting, the chief exclaimed again. Here is the rest of it, written on a sheet of paper, Riley said. The Blackstar left it on the table. Read this. He handed it to the chief, who read it aloud. The phonograph is simple. It has an electric connection and holds a special record made from my voice. As to the volleys of shots, and I trust no one is injured, for if so, it will be an accident. That is simple too. Examine the building, and fastened in the windows you'll find automatics. You never saw any exactly like them before. They are an invention of a good friend of mine. You'll notice the cartridges are fed from a belt containing 100 rounds of ammunition. Since there are 15 guns, that will make some shooting. You'll notice, too, that the guns are operated by electricity. You'll find wires, and if you trace them, they will lead you to a cheap lodging house 3 blocks away. Do not blame the lodging house people, for they are innocent. One of my men, sitting in a room there, has a good view of the factory. He touches a button, and a gun is fired. He plays a keyboard, and you get a volley. Another button starts or stops the phonograph, and you hear me shriek encouragement to my men. Quite simple, is it not? I have been to some trouble and expense fitting up this fake headquarters, but I am sure my profit will be great. Please be kind to the furniture I am leaving behind, and tell yourselves again you cannot cope with the Blackstar. And now go out and explain to the newspaper men what became of the band of desperate crooks you besieged in the factory. It ought to make interesting reading. Muggs gave a snort of disgust and turned away from the table. Roger Verbeck's eyes met those of Detective Riley, and each read determination in the other's countenance. The Blackstar had evaded them again, but the end was not yet. "And I've got to tell the newspaper men," the chief exclaimed. "That gold. I wonder if he got it, and from where?" His answer came immediately. A sergeant of detectives hurried to them from the hall. "Chief," he cried. "Word just came from headquarters. There's been a consulate robbed. Got a fortune in gold yesterday at noon to buy war stuff. Thought they were keeping it quiet, I suppose." The Blackstar knew about it, though. His men robbed the vault and left the watchman on the floor, bound and gagged, with the Blackstar pasted on his forehead. "It's 100,000 in gold coin." Consuls frantic. "Yes," said the chief wearily. "It seems the Blackstar knew about it." Johnston McCulley, John Maxstone being the nom de plume under which the first 2 of this series of novelettes were written. is writing another novelette dealing with the Black Star and the efforts of Roger Verbeck to capture him. You can look forward to soon having the pleasure of reading this story, and Mr. McCulley says that it is his best Black Star story so far. End of Blackstar's Subterfuge by Johnston McCulley.